Here's this object, which has both the characteristics of a planet and the characteristics of a comet, comes through our solar system. It's well documented in the Bible. Planet X appears to be fairly well documented around the time of Moses' exodus out of Egypt. When this happens, the following things, all of them can happen, or some of them: global warming, melting polar ice, rising ocean levels, possibly a pole shift, rapid, drastic climate changes, storms with torrential rains, 200-mile-an-hour winds, meteor strikes, volcanoes, earthquakes, tidal waves, land masses rising from the ocean, land masses sinking from the ocean. And I'm going to go over some of these things in detail. These percentages, or my percentages, are not from any scientific study or anything, but I've chosen these as representative of what I feel has been going on here for a while. About 49.5% of the population believes global warming is a clear and present danger, putting the Earth at risk, putting animals and plant life at risk, and human beings at risk of harm. And that is caused by that knucklehead next door in his SUV. Human activity. That's about 49.5% of the adults. Another 49.5% of the adults believe one of the two things. Either that global warming isn't happening at all and isn't real, or that it's kind of a naturally occurring, slow-moving event, and it won't do any harm, and there's nothing we can do about it anyway. That's the other 49%. That leaves 1%, ladies and gentlemen, the 1% who actually get their news someplace other than television news, who take the time to actually read books and look for alternative news on the internet or on shortwave radio. That's 1% or less of the adults in this country. Things are getting very, very bizarre, to say the least. And the global warming issue has been very effective in keeping people in the dark as to exactly what's been going on. Joshua 10:13 talks about the sun standing still. Now, up until fairly recently, and I mean within the last 55, 60 years, scientists couldn't explain how the sun could possibly stand still. Bible scholars referred to Joshua 10:13 as a metaphor. Typically, Bible scholars do that. If they don't understand this stuff, they say, well, it's a metaphor. It really means something else. Well, about 1950 or so, the concept of a pole shift became apparent to scientists, and they understood how the Hebrews in the Sinai desert could look up and see the sun not moving. For the 19th century before that, they couldn't. If you were standing at the right place on the planet and the pole was to shift, the sun would have the appearance of standing still in the sky. Another researcher, about the same time, Dr. Velikovsky, Emmanuel Velikovsky, he did something nobody had done previously. He did research comparing what the men studying the ancient Chinese had written and the men studying the ancient Mayans had written, and the people studying the people who live in Scandinavia, ancient folks, had written, both of whom had, all those ancient cultures had written records and calendars. Velikovsky reasoned that if the Hebrews standing in the Sinai desert saw the sun standing still, then the Chinese must have saw it not come up the next morning when it was supposed to. Keeping in mind the Chinese had written records and had calendars, and you could line up the Hebrew calendar and the Chinese calendar to compare them if you knew what you were doing. And guess what, ladies and gentlemen? On that date in history, when the Hebrews in the Sinai desert saw the sun stand still, the Chinese saw the sun not come up. Well, of course, the Bible means what it says, and it's 100% accurate. Exodus 16:31, manna from heaven. Now, this all happened shortly after Moses made his exodus. The Hebrews in the Sinai desert would wake up every morning, and they would find substance of a certain color, of a certain substance, and a certain taste lying on the ground that they could pick up and eat. Manna from heaven. As it turns out, other cultures who had written records and calendars all left written records attached to the same dates, where every morning they could go out and pick up a substance of the same color and the same consistency and the same taste and eat it in China, in South America, and in Scandinavia. What we believe manna from heaven was carbohydrates in the atmosphere that would condense when the sun hit it. It would fall to ground, and you could pick up and eat it. Once again, the Bible being verified by other written records all over the planet of that same substance being there. Isaiah 24:1. Behold, the Lord maketh the earth empty, and maketh it waste, and turneth it upside down, and scatter abroad the inhabitants thereof. That sounds like a global earthquake to me. That sounds like a very good description of a global earthquake. Isaiah 24:20. The earth shall reel to and fro like a drunkard, and shall be removed like a cottage. Once again, ladies and gentlemen, what appears to be an excellent description of a very large global earthquake. Right there in the Bible, waiting for you to read it and look at it yourself. When I first heard this story about Planet X, and I read Hazelwood's book, one of the first things I did was approach a friend of mine who has privileged access to certain government agencies. And I said, can you check this out? I'd appreciate it. He said, I never heard of it, but I'll check it out. He got back with me a couple of weeks later, and he says, John, it's a real thing. They've been watching this thing for more than 20 years. It's out there. They got the Hubble watching it. They got all this instrumentation keeping track of it. It's got a 250,000-mile debris field on either side of it. When I say a debris field, I mean rocks the size of pickup trucks and rocks the size of Rhode Island. Big rocks and little rocks. It's traveling in a cloud of red dust, which means when we finally are able to see it, it'll probably duplicate what was seen by ancient peoples as being a red cross in the sky. The red dust will refract the light and make it appear to be a red cross in the sky. Both my private sources and NASA says that Planet X is 3 to 5 Earth masses large. About 1979, they sent the Pioneer space probe looking for this thing, and here's why. Astronomy uses a lot of instrumentation. They use telescopes in the visible light spectrum, telescopes in the infrared light spectrum, telescopes in the ultraviolet light spectrum, and radio telescopes. They take all this imaging, and this is where astronomy gets down to what's really important, that's mathematics. They use mathematics to determine how big these objects are, how far away they are, how fast they're traveling, how far apart they are from each other. Pioneer Space Probe determined all those things, and they've been watching it ever since. Watching it very carefully. They've determined that this object is on an elliptical orbit. That means it goes way out. And when I say way out, it takes 1,800 years to go out and 1,800 years to come back. Our planets that we're used to, Mars, Venus, Neptune, Saturn, and so forth, they make more or less a circular orbit. Some of them tend to be a bit elliptical, but pretty much circular. This planet has been the object of a lot of government activity, building shelters all over the United States, and they are, in fact, shelters for high-ranking government officials and their immediate families. They're including their adult children and their parents. Every 3,600 years, this object, which has both the characteristics of a planet and the characteristics of a comet, comes through our solar system. It's well documented in the Bible. Planet X appears to be fairly well documented around the time of Moses' exodus out of Egypt. When this happens, the following things, all of them can happen, or some of them. Global warming, melting polar ice, rising ocean levels, possibly a pole shift, rapid, drastic climate changes, storms with